And then his plan was to actually make the island of Antigua a colony of the Ashanti Empire all the way in West Africa.
What?
Exactly.
What? Welcome to this episode of Your Guide on Ghana. This episode is going to be really interesting as I have a conversation and learn a little bit of history about the Bahamas, other parts of the Caribbean, and how they are connected to Ghana. Stay tuned. So today I am going to have a fantastic conversation, very interesting, very engaging, and it just really shows how our cultures come together from the continent of Africa to the Caribbean islands. There's so many things that are done that people in the islands don't realize have African roots, and people in Africa don't realize that Caribbeans are doing some of those things. So I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today. Could you please introduce yourself, what you do, where you're from, and why you're in Ghana?
Yes. Well, my name is Christopher Omo Shango Davis. I'm actually a historical researcher and interpreter from the Bahamas. I work in a museum back home. That's my day job, but I also do my own research. And I'm a recent author of a book and a recent founder of an entity known as Sankofa Flamingo.
Okay.
And I'm also on the executive council of the World Jungkoonu Festival Foundation. And as you know, we're planning this big thing next year. It's going to be a massive, what we call edutainment initiative right here, and it will coincide hopefully with the Ghanaian independence celebrations.
Okay. So for somebody who's watching and doesn't know, what is the World Jungkoonu Foundation? What is Jungkoonu?
Well, I think it'd be better if I define Jungkoonu first.
Okay, all right. Let's start
and that's
there.
actually one of the reasons I'm here, to actually bring definitive proof and finally putting an end to the story of Jungkoonu, right? And it's based on a man that the British called John Kanu, like the canoe, John Canoe, right? And essentially it was a typical story of, British cultural appropriation, where they took something that was actually an expression of a man who fought against the British and the Dutch slave trade, right there in Pocasoo, known today as Princess Town.
Okay.
Expelled the British in 1712 from Fort Middle Cross. Expelled the Dutch from Fort Boutre and Fort St. Antonio. And for several years, he was actually able to hold this fortress with a diverse group, actually, of different Akan people who were all fighting against European enslavement and European colonization. Now, of course, we got many different versions of the story where the British told us, and if you see the festival, it's actually celebrated on the same days as the Winneba Fancy Dress Festival.
Yes, the Winneba Fancy Dress Festival is on New Year's Day.
Yes, Day, right.
Yes.
And we also have another parade on Boxing Day, right? And so we were told that John Canoe, and his real name, by the way, was Jan Kwao.
Jan Kwao.
Yeah, Gyan. And then, in the tree, you put that extra, W is sometimes a vowel, and that's a great example of that. So it's Jan Kwao.
Okay.
And then you could kind of see how the name kind of changed, and then the British calling him John Canoe, right? And we call it Jungkoonu, essentially. But they told us that this guy was a slave that came to the Bahamas, begged our slave masters for one day off, and in their holy graciousness, they granted us this day off. And of course, I'm being sarcastic, right? And we all know that was just pretty much a lie. And then the story then evolved into, oh, well, he was just African chief. And then we got the typical, slave trader story. And in the book that I recently completed, I actually challenged that notion, where they place so much blame and on the at the feet of Africans. Then you have so many different African groups apologizing for the transatlantic slave trade. It'd literally be like, if you look at the Medellin cartel with Pablo Escobar at the top, it'd be like the guy on the street corner apologizing for everything that the cartel has done. And he's not the major beneficiary. The major beneficiaries of African colonization and the transatlantic slave trade and the chattel slavery that took place in the Western Hemisphere is Europe and the Western world. You understand? And one could even argue Arabia to a certain extent, you understand, in Asia. However, in this context, in Jungkoonu, you could see how it's been severed. Now, when you look at many of the different nations, and this is what kind of sparked my research, we have the biggest Jan Kwao commemoration probably outside of the Fancy Dress Festival, but of course we're going to do this cultural link, and then we could have a little friendly argument about which one is bigger, which one is better. But at the end of the day, we know it's all one and the same, right? And so when you look at how these festivals have evolved in the different places, and then when you also look at the national heroes of the different nations within the Caribbean, for any Ghanaian, it's normal. So, for example, you have the father of Guyana, who founded the Berbice Uprising in the 1760s, formed literally a nation within a British colony. His name was Kofi. The father of Antigua, he had a plan to blow up the palace while they were having a ball, kill all the colonizers.
Wait, blow up the palace?
Right, so this was in the island of Antigua
Right.
in the 1730s. And the governor was having this big ball, ironically around Christmas time.
Okay.
And he wanted to blow up the place while they were having this big party to pretty much wipe out most of the colonial officials. And then his plan was to actually make the island of Antigua a colony of the Ashanti Empire all the way in West Africa.
What?
Exactly.
What?
This is a serious thing here. And then
We're both getting bit by mosquitoes out here.
Small things, man. I'm an island boy. We actually have a lot more mosquitoes than
Okay,
Canada.
okay.
We get sandfly, mosquito,
Okay.
the whole nine.
Okay.
Right?
So you're saying they were trying to make this island a colony of the Ashanti Kingdom.
Of the Ashanti Kingdom in West Africa, right? And so, right, and these things are just unprecedented. You understand? And again, Jamaica, you have Queen Nani, of course.
Yes.
Captain Cujo.
Yes.
Wow. When you go to Jamaica, even in Suriname, you have places known as Coromantine. You know, Akampong, which is called Achimpong in Ghana. And then these places are directly linked to it. And these were the same people that fought against British and Dutch enslavement in the same way that Jan Kwao did.
Right.
And in these areas, so unlike the Bahamas, where it's our national festival,
Yes.
in Jamaica, it kind of existed and was retained in these what we call maroon communities,
Okay.
which were essentially small states within these British colonies, most of which were founded by Akan people. Okay, and then when you look at Captain Cujo and Queen Nani, you can see again, even in that case, how the story is lost in translation, because now you have a place called Trelawney Town. Trelawney was a former governor of Jamaica, but before it was Trelawney Town, it was called Cujo Town. See, this is something that's inextricably linked to Ghana, to the Akan people. And even when you bring it to the modern history of the Bahamas, our first prime minister who got us independence, even though we don't feel like we're independent, but that's for another time. But even him, you know, his father was actually from Trelawney Town, which was Cujo Town, and his father had been there for generations to generations. So the father of the man who became our first prime minister was descended from these Akan Maroons in Jamaica. Yeah, I know, it's a lot.
I'm just
Yeah.
very fascinated
Yeah.
by all of this.
Even when you look in Alabama, this is something that's all throughout the diaspora. In Alabama, they have a place called Africa Town.
Yes.
But that town was founded by a man by the name of Cujo Lewis. You understand? And Cujo, of course, is an Akan name. I
Yes.
think it means born on a Monday, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken. You know, so what actually confused me was, oh, and of course, I got to mention Queen Brafu again. Sorry, of the Virgin Islands. There's so many.
Queen Brafu of the Virgin Islands.
Right. And then you had two fires in New York, one in 1712, one in 1741. Again, started by Akan people. And when you look at
You said fires?
Fires in New York, they attempted to burn down the city of New York.
Okay.
They actually have one little small plaque at the corner. The name escapes me right now, but I'll definitely send you the information.
Okay.
But the two famous New York fires of 1712 and 1741, also founded by Akan people. And these were people who were able to hold on and literally, like I said, form their own nations within nations. Of course, in America, the demographic was different, where blacks are a minority, and so it was a lot more difficult.
So I have a question. So you're saying that there were Akans who, okay, so in New York, the Akans started the fire, or?
Yeah. It was, well, the first one in 1712, they were described as 23 men of Fante and Ashanti extraction.
Okay.
And when you look at the way the slave ships operated at that time, up until about the 1740s, and from the mid-1600s, it was almost exclusively that the British took enslaved people from these Akan regions, from the present-day Gold Coast, the British and the Dutch. And so that's what kind of set the foundation. So, for example, even in the Bahamas,
Yes.
where most of us, and you could probably look at us and see it, most of us are actually either Mandingo coming from Senegal, Mali region, or we're actually, most of us are actually Nigerian. And then we have another big chunk who are Congolese and Angolan,
Right.
you know, all the different tribes from those areas. But when you look at the beginning of the history, the Akan people were the ones who set that base. And so by the time as the British shifted their slave trading activities to other parts of Africa, the Akans were already in the Bahamas, in Jamaica, already establishing that. Jungkoonu was already happening. And when you look at Jamaica, it exists in the Maroon communities that are linked to the Akan people. When you look in Guyana, they have something called the Mashrami, which is actually an Arawak word, but even though it's an Arawak word, you still see these kind of loose commemorations to John Quao. And in Belize, you have it as a play, where people dress up as the Dutch and the English. But what it began as was a reenactment of the famous battles that Jan Quao actually won against the British and the Dutch. And he won them soundingly. And they actually, and one thing that's common about African colonization and conquering, every time you see a great African civilization force, just look at the military technology of Western Europe. Okay, so the most famous example would probably be the Zulu people. And after they invented what they call the Maxing gun, which is the machine gun, that was when they were able to defeat the Zulus. When you look at the Zulus, Shaka Zulu was so famous because he invented the assegai, cut the spear in half. And again, it's so important to really get deep into our history because the Zulus, like the Akan, even the Ashanti, they tell you that Ashanti means because of war. And they tell you the Zulu people, they love war and they were warlike and all of this foolishness. When essentially, but what they don't do is when you look at Africa and the history and genocides that occurred in Africa, because that's what they were, you understand? For some reason, we've been conditioned not to, number one, respect African diversity. And so in the West, what they do is they would look at the history of Ghana, Gao, Fante, Ashanti, Nzima, Ahanta, and then even the other groups that come from other countries. Africa is extremely diverse. That, again, looking at it, we've been conditioned in the West, even us who have African descent. And of course, with us, over time, we've really mixed in. So if you do a DNA test with me, for example, you would find Mandingo, you would find Yoruba, you would probably find a little bit of Akan. You would even probably find a little bit of European blood. You understand what I'm saying? Because we're very mixed. Whereas we've been conditioned not to respect African diversity, and we look at the past with a 21st century mindset. And that leads to one of the biggest lies that has been told, and that's black people enslaving other black people. You understand? Not knowing that in the context of Africa 300 years ago, if I went to Fante and I went to Ashanti and say, hey, we want black people, what the hell are you talking about? I'm Fante, that's Ashanti. Even though they're technically very closely culturally linked. But when you look at Nigeria, you see, of course, the diversity there as well. And so that's one part of it. And then the second part of it that's more crucial in my view is the fact that we've been conditioned to have more sympathy for all other people except African people, and that's what it is, straight and plain. And so when you look at other genocides that have happened, and other horrible things that has happened, using World War II as an example, as one of the most well-known, what the Nazis did was absolutely terrible. You understand? Everybody knows it, and that was one regime in Europe moving all around, right? However, when they look at that past, even though it is in the 20th century, we still don't apply our modern terms to some people and take certain myopic perspectives on it. You understand what I'm saying? And so, for example, one of the myopic perspectives that we get is when we look at Africa and we look at what they call the Jewish Holocaust. Now, in the Jewish Holocaust, you had many different nations that kind of let the Nazis roll through. You look at Austria, you look at France. They even had a group of people called the Judenrat, who were
the Judenrat.
The Judenrat.
Okay.
Or the Judenrad, or the Judenrat. They were actually a group of Ashkenazi Jews who sided with Hitler. You understand? And they helped Hitler and the SS and the Gestapo capture other Jews and put them in the concentration camps. Rightfully so, we do not blame the Judenrat for the Holocaust, do we? Every SS officer was not the one that put the people in the gas chambers. They had other people working for them. Nations like Romania, where almost every Jew was exterminated and stuff like that. But we don't understand. We don't do that. You want to know why we don't do that? Because we understand and we sympathize with European diversity,
Right.
and we are more sensitive to European causes.
Right.
And so, when Germany invaded France, when we would never say, "Oh well, mother, look at these white people fighting amongst each other." When Germany invaded, even though a German and a French person has less in common than, say, a Yoruba and a Fon. Even a Gao and an Ashanti, probably you could argue that they have less in common because they both speak Latin-based languages. You understand, right? And so they are both Christians, same religious philosophy and everything. So how come we have people who are less diverse than us, and yet we don't use these myopic terms to describe what happened to them? And it's because we respect and we sympathize with their genocide. Now, what happens is people are placed in survival mode. And for people of African descent, since our contact with certain people, specifically Christian Europe, Western Europe, we've never really come out of that survival mode. And there's a popular analogy, if I may, that people often use. It's called black crab syndrome or crab in a barrel syndrome.
I've heard the crab in a barrels.
Thank you very
crab
much.
in a bucket.
I think that's one of the biggest lies as well. Reason being,
Why?
simply put, where do crabs live? Do they live in buckets?
No, we put them in buckets when we catch them in the
Thank
sea.
you very much. Now, when you put them in buckets, they are now placed in acute survival mode.
Right.
Fight or flight and all that. As great and as grateful as I am that you have me on your platform, and as cool as me and Brother Vincent are, someone come in here with a gun right now and start shooting, you probably can walk all over me and walk over the fence.
Trying to get out.
Thank you, trying to get out. Because in that moment, you're trying to survive. And this is something that's true since the beginning of human history.
Okay.
But for some reason, that humanity has been removed away. And all we've been doing is pointing fingers. Oh, they just want this African chief. Right? And then compare Cape Coast to Liverpool. Compare Gorée Island in Senegal to Paris.
Right.
And see who make the money. You understand?
Right.
And a lot of those things, this is what I addressed in my book. And this survival mode thing is something we have lost acknowledgement of. And so I had someone on social media the other day said that why is it that black people think they deserve all these handouts? You understand? And I almost cursed him out, and I was just like, what are you talking about handouts? We've been giving all y'all the handouts. It's really thin. Another thing is that we in the West are really conditioned to believe that we are enemies with people in Africa. The story is, oh, well, the Africans sold y'all into slavery. And all, just a bunch of misinformation and lies, right? And so because we don't acknowledge that survival mode, that's what it is. So in actuality, you cannot blame that crab in the bucket. And then furthermore, this is the situation that we're in. This is the reality. In order for those crabs to move together, so if they're in the bucket fighting against each other together, the only way they move is if the man who put them in the bucket,
takes them out,
aka Europe, take them out or move them all together in unison. And that's where the Pan-African philosophy comes in, of us sharing the same past, the same present, and the same destiny. And in the current state that we're in, survival mode, in this bucket, we only could move when the white man come and take us there. And then what they do, take all the nice pictures and call themselves philanthropists. I don't know who wrote Black Panther, but a lot of people have a problem with the movie. But listen, sometimes we can be a little finicky when we talking about our history. But I actually love the movie Black Panther because I could see things that they put in there and I know it's well researched.
Right.
So even when you watch the beginning of Black Panther and you see that meteorite that brought the vibranium to Earth, that spot that it landed, watch it again, right on Earth, is Northern Kivu in the Congo. That is that exact spot it landed. So when I saw it, I was like, boy, these people did their research. And vibranium is a metaphor for coltan and tantalum.
That's what I thought when I watched it, that it was a metaphor for it.
It was a metaphor for that. And it was like, what if we had control of our resources? And then when you look at the West, we have so many great black inventors. Inventing the cell phone, the traffic light, Big Ben, the Big Ben clock is named after Benjamin the inventor. Last name escapes me.
So it was a black man who did that?
Benjamin Banneker. There we go. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
After Benjamin Banneker.
I didn't know that.
And he's the first man that created the mechanical clock. And ironically, he is said to have been from the Dogon tribe. And the Dogon tribe are people who National Geographic, they love to come there, put their camera on. So what they do is they mess up Africa, wait 200 years later. And those little small tribes that are quote unquote nomadic that somehow survived and stayed away, they don't come to Accra. They don't ever do a documentary on Accra and show you people in the busy city, living, people hustling, making money, you know, understand? They want to show you poverty and animals. You understand? There's so many ironies. And then they come with their camera and take their camera 200 years later, after only this one small group has survived, and say, look, this is Africa. You understand? And then even with that, they don't put it into context. They often do it to the Dogon, and all they do is show you them standing up on the stilts. Oh, the stilt man, we have it in Trinidad too, you know, and stuff like that. But what they don't do is they don't tell you that the Dogon are the master astronomers of the world. For at least 800 years, they have had a diagram of a star system called the Sirius star system. NASA has been ridiculing them up until the modern times. Oh, these Africans, there's a bunch of African witchcraft, bunch of African humbo jumbo. I think it was 2007 when NASA finally completed their diagram of the Sirius star system.
Right.
By the way, you cannot see it with the naked eye, only with high-powered telescopes. So they don't even know how these fellas was looking at it. I mean, I know, I think, but they don't know. And the diagram is exactly the same as the one that the Dogon had.
Really?
Split an image.
Really?
You understand? But of course, the Dogon gets no credit. All they do is show you them jumping up and down, dancing. And even that, they don't put the proper context to it. Oh, Africans love to dance, and that's it. You understand? And then it's so crazy, they telling you, you know, all these shows coming out now about people from America, people from Europe coming to Africa to rescue these animals. Rescue the black rhino. Well, how the black rhino get endangered? Who take all the ivory? Like, come on, man. Save the great African elephant. You all want to, come on, you understand? So it's craziness to me. And James Baldwin said to be a conscious black man in America is to be in constant frustration. And I just add to that and say to be a conscious black man or woman in the world can sometimes lead to that frustration. And the way that we deal with it is immersing ourselves in our culture. What we're doing now, ranting about it and all this stuff. But then we have to realize that we're in this bucket and we have to move out of this bucket together as one people. You can't be two people going 50 state, you understand?
Yeah. I have a question for you. Stay tuned for part 2 of my conversation with him. This has been quite an interesting and engaging dialogue, and I hope that you've enjoyed it. Don't forget to share this video, like the video, and to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. So I'll see you next time.